Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Silicon Zeros. We've been learning about chaos and delays and time. All the stuff you need to become a Time Lord. And we're getting ready, I guess, to do delay count? We could do another aside, but I'm sort of enjoying learning about this new mechanic. So what's up? This ought to be familiar. It's time for the old counter again. Set memory slot 0 to 0, 1 to 1, and so on. Like latches, I've improved writers. They can be tweaked with the clock period editor. Didn't we just have that? Delay right? Why do we have delay? Why doesn't delay count depend on delay right if... And why does delay count reteach us about delayed writers? Okay, well, whatever. So set memory slot 0. So what do I have? I have a latch, a number, and an adder, and I have this one writer. Well, that's pretty normal. So actually, I can just grab this from my palette, right? And do this. Now, I guess I have to wait for the sum of all of these plus 1, right? So I need, like, at least... So the very first value won't be ready until 517 ticks have gone by. Milliticks. Oh, what is this about graying out? When I mouse over this... Huh, interesting. So this tells me what its dependencies are, I guess. When latch 5 changes, and this one, when its inputs change, from number 5. Okay, so interestingly, this guy is saying that its input is coming from here, which is only sort of true, right? Its other input is from itself, which is a little bit more exciting. Whatever. I think we can just set the clock period to be all of these added together plus 1. So 18. That should give us time for everything to stabilize. So this is all staying unstable. Now this is getting ready to stabilize to 1 because the adder has stabilized. Now this latch is getting ready to oh wait. Is this right? Maybe this is too slow. The clock period, is this right? Because the latch isn't actually writing anything. I guess that makes sense. We need the latch to, the latch should still have a 0. It shouldn't be getting ready to work on this new 1 yet. We need to wait for this input to stabilize so that the writer becomes stable. But what I'm interested in is, why did this go so much faster than I expected, right? Ah, because a latch starts with a 0 in it, a stable 0. Interesting. And once its input has stabilized to a 1, it's ready to transition this to a 1 instantly, which means this will start transitioning. So we don't, I think, actually need to wait for the sum of these, just for, like, the maximum. This stuff will all stabilize quickly-ish? I'm not sure, actually. Maybe that's just for the first input. So let's go ahead and have this writer write its value. We put a 0 there. Great. Now this has an unstable input. And this stuff needs to wait for 5 ticks to become stable, right? Ah, but this becoming stable is not a precondition of this becoming stable, because this is just what will write in the next round. So we can actually just set it to 12. Or maybe it has to be 13, I think? I don't remember. Let's test it real quick. Yeah, we wrote a little too soon there. Okay. So I think if I just test this now, we should be good. Yeah, because this becomes stable instantly when the new clock cycle starts. And then this has to wait. It doesn't become stable, but it becomes ready. And from the point of view of this thing, it becomes stable after this much clock time has passed. What happens over here is not interesting. There we go. Just like... go. Oh. Is it like a... oh, fast. Okay. I mean, we could skip to Militick 100 or something, but... You've done great work figuring out how the delay works. The more you do, though, the more I get to thinking there's something we're overlooking. Boy, she has a lot of ings. For now, I'm handing you over to the others. They've got some projects that'll probably be important for building a building! Gigantic, unplayable, game-breaking bug. Should be building. Building a high-speed CPU. Our ticket to beating Jack. Meanwhile, I'll try and figure out how that high-speed CPU will work. It'll take me a while, so do me a favor, Dana. Don't work too fast. Yeah, well, you just taught me all about delays. Of course not. Slow stall. Ah, Dana, my main project isn't ready for you to work on just yet. Carol only told me you were coming over a few minutes ago. Here's something that'll help me later. Build a machine that waits for one clock period, then writes a 0 into memory slot 0. So, every other clock period it writes, basically, is the idea. I'm not sure if we should be doing this every other clock period, or just the first two. But, I mean, it seems like the obvious thing to do is to wire a latch up to a latch, right? And then wire that up to a writer. I'm not sure why we got a register. That seems useless. So, but, okay. So wiring a latch up to a latch, I'm sure that's very lovely. But... our writer doesn't know that it's waiting for a value. It knows it's a 0, and it's being told to write it there, and it'll write it after one clock cycle. So... what we actually need is a way to get nil, right? To tell the writer not to write anything in a clock cycle. And the obvious way to do that, which is being hinted to us very strongly, is with a register. The registers start with, if it enter escape, doesn't count. Start with a nil in them. So what we can actually do is something more like this. And we don't need 2 latches at all, we just need 1, I think. Maybe we don't need any? No, we need 1 to get a 0, I guess. Wire the latch up to itself so that it... actually, it doesn't even need that, does it? Get out of here. It'll stabilize to not storing anything. We could make it write to itself, but there's no particular need. And then at the end of the first clock cycle, this thing will stabilize to being a 0, or it'll become a 0, and then we'll wait for this to stabilize again. Okay, so let's set the clock cycle to 13 again, which we determined was enough for a writer, and see what happens here. So we're waiting for this thing's input to stabilize, and it has. And now on the next clock cycle, we'll write. Or wait, have we already written? Yeah, this is the clock cycle where we'll write something, but what we'll write is nothing at all. And now the register has just gotten the new value of 0, and it's sending a 0 to this thing, which once we stabilize, wrote a 0. Great. Good, I've gotten my main project in some kind of shape, and you can come over and start on it in a moment. A slow staller should be pretty useful for it. Carol is planning something big. Really, I'm not sure how my project fits into it, but I'm not too worried. Most of the work we do here ends up being useful sooner or later. Oh, it's scoring me on ticks now. Did it do that before? I don't remember. It didn't. Okay, so that's a millitick thing. Fine. Combiner, 3 stars. This one ought to be a challenge. This one's a bit different. I'm working with volatile write-once memory. That means you can't ever place an incorrect value in memory since it'd be stuck there. Anyway, take the sum of memory slots 0 and 1 and store it in slot 2 without breaking my new memory, please. This doesn't seem too bad at all. Seems like we just learned the tools that we needed to do this. And based on that, it should be, like, pretty trivial. So we have a reader. Ah. That's the complication. We have to read 2 memory slots, and we only have 1 reader. Right, that's what's going to make this a little bit tricky. We can't add another one. Can I delete this? No. Okay, good, because I can't solve the puzzle without it, and I can't add it back. So I think we're going to use, like, do I have output selectors or something here? No, I don't have any kinds of selectors. That's interesting. I have a register, though. Indeed. Okay, so what do I know about this? I know that I'm going to need our typical counter here, because we're going to need to read from this twice. And the only way to control what input it gets is with something that feeds into it. Like, right? We need to do that. So we can read slot 0 in the first tick and then slot 2 in the second tick. The question is, how do we... Okay, I guess we can use our staller here that we just built to delay the input from this thing going into, say, a latch rather than a writer. And then have... Ugh. Delay it going into a latch? No, make it go into a latch immediately. And also go into an adder? And have that adder read from the latch as well as from its direct input? That doesn't seem right. I think we need the adder to read from 2 latches. Well, okay, here's an idea. What's my time limit? 60. So that's time for 5 cycles. Plenty of time for whatever algorithm I decide to use. Okay, let's go grab our staller here, which seems like it's going to be useful. It's just a latch plugged into a latch. No, a latch plugged into a register. Okay, well that's pretty simple then. Forget it. So this is fine. We want this. And then we want a latch. That's a writer. Get out of here. We want a latch that takes this input and sends it to a register with one input. Right? Or actually, do we want 2 inputs and have one of them be this? That seems pretty cool, right? Something like this? So after a single clock cycle, we'll have read this. And what will even then happen? Let me set the clock cycle to 13 and see what happens with this just so far. So the slot number to read from has stabilized, and we've read a 45, which we're writing to this input, and a 0 to this register, right? Ah, but it didn't stabilize, so okay. Wait, what? This 45 wasn't stable for long enough. And then this thing's inputs changed, so it stopped reading that value. So here, we actually do need kind of a delay, or a longer clock period. So if I make it 15, actually probably even has to, well, let's try 15. So let's back off. We're just now getting this input, the reader to stabilize. And so we have some new semi-stable inputs coming here. Why does this say 0 question mark? Shouldn't it be stable by now? This input stayed stable for a very long time. Didn't it? Why did this cause the input to become unstable? This to store changed, but stored hasn't changed and won't be. That's very strange to me. I see. This thing became destabilized because it got a new value. Even though that's not changing this, it's still unstable. Interesting. And now we're about to end the clock tick and actually write that value. Perfect. But this hasn't really helped us at all, has it? Because we did not succeed at leaving either of these nil, as we might have liked. We wrote a 0 to one of them and a 45 to the other, which means that if we had an adder and a reader, or an adder and a writer over here, we'd go off immediately. Where we actually need it to wait for the next value to come in. So what would happen, though, at the end of the next clock cycle? 45 and 39 are written. So we have succeeded in getting the right values here, but they're arriving at a very awkward time. How can I wait? Well, so, okay, first of all, was this delay actually even useful? I think yes. We need to have these things be stored to at an offset. And I think it's no coincidence at all that this happened at time 30 and our time limit is 60. We just need to make something that waits not just one clock cycle, but it writes not every 2 clock cycles, but every 4 clock cycles, right? We have to have a latch wired up to a register, wired up to a latch, wired up to a register or something? Oh, that's a reader. Get out of here. Alright, well, I really don't actually need this whole thing. Whatever. So if I grab this, paste it, and change this to have just one input again, wire it up like so. Copy, paste, wire it back up to itself. And have... Is the latch here what I actually want? No. I think. I want it to be an adder fed from this. I think. Like so? I'm not at all convinced by this, but let's see what happens. So this is all stabilizing to nil. There's no values being written here. So we sent it to 45, which is no good. This 45 has gotten latched in. It's now stored, and it's... We're trying to overwrite it. But I think that 45 will still trickle through to the other side. It will, yeah. So that's no good. It seems like the problem is that a 0 gets in here too quickly, right? Ideally, we would like it if it were able to remain nil. And then this adder would just be like totally fine, right? We wouldn't need any of this nonsense. So, what if, then, we took this stuff and just put another latch in here? Wait, that's a writer. Won't that make this be delayed by a bit? No, because latches stabilize to 0 instantly, which we don't want. That's the problem. We're getting the 0 from the previous stage in here too quickly. So I don't think we can plug this adder up here directly. It's... maybe... Okay, so the problem is that latches have 0 in them, right? And we don't really want that as their default. But what if instead of a latch, we were to use a register, which has a very similar behavior to a latch, except that its default value is nil, right? So we put another register in here with just one slot, like so, and wire it up like that. Then this will stabilize to nil instead of to 0. And then these will both stabilize at the same time to the new value we want to write, I think. And we can make our writer take this and this. No. Because then we'd be writing emptiness too soon, wouldn't we? Well, let's see what happens. I'm not sure at all. I think this sum will stabilize to nil pretty quickly, which means we won't write anything until this is ready. Yeah, so in this first cycle, we're not writing anything. That's good. And now we're about to execute our first clock cycle. Interestingly, this thing hasn't stabilized yet, which is a little weird to me. Does our clock cycle need to be a bit longer for some reason? Is it because this stuff just became unstable right near the end of the cycle? Okay, well, I mean, we can set it to like 17. I don't know if we have time for that. Oops, don't mouse over that. So now it's got stable things saying write nothing to slot 0, so we can do that, that's fine. Now the 45 has come into the adder with a nil, which means that when it's finished stabilizing, no more writes will have occurred before it stabilizes, because the clock tick won't have gone by. When it finishes stabilizing, it'll still be a nil here, and we still won't write anything, right? Yeah, it's stabilized to nil. And we're now about to write, but what we write is nothing. And a 39 and a 45 come in, which means we have an 84 ready. And it's just become stable, write an 84 to 2. We did it! That was cool. Looks like that was a bit trickier to work with than I expected. Think I'll hold off on using volatile memory again, at least for a while. Still, maybe you learned something useful from it? We can only hope. Yeah, that was an interesting one. So, it says ideally we could use it in fewer modules, which I'm inclined to agree with. And a couple fewer ticks. Interesting. What are we doing here that's dumb? Well, what is the point of this register? Could I remove this register and just have this feeding directly into the adder and another register to, like, I think the answer to that must be no, because otherwise we would have been way farther off on ticks. But let's try it and see what happens. We have undo, right? So, what if I just did this? Right? Like, this doesn't seem like it can work. but I'm not sure why yet. Are we adding... We're adding nil to chaos, I guess. I see. The clock tick is about to go off. We're about to corrupt memory. I think this is still the right approach, but I need to increase the clock cycle time a lot, because this thing finally being read is now actually in the critical path for this thing writing, and so we need our clock cycle to be much longer. We've now, I think, we've corrupted memory, which kind of stinks. I wanted to see how much longer, so we need 11 more ticks in our clock cycle to make this not be a problem. So that's 28. Yeah, now we're stabilizing to a harmless input. And just in time, we get there. And now we're reading, instead of like nil plus question mark, we're... Yeah, this is actually... Wait a minute. We're writing it to the wrong place. Oh. That's fine though, right? We can fix that. Just, instead of from the latch's output, read it from the latch's input, please. So in the first cycle we didn't write anything. Now in the second cycle, we have... Wait, is this working? I'm not sure. Oh yeah, the reader stabilizes pretty quickly, or more quickly than this does, of course, because this depends on the reader to stabilize first. We're going to stabilize to the right value, but in the meantime, this has stabilized to the correct value, but, or it's... Why do these still have question marks? This confuses me. Oh, wait, what? I see. I thought we were at the end of the clock cycle, but we weren't. We were just at the end of this thing stabilizing, but it stabilized to like something we don't care about, and it did so not at the end of a clock cycle, so that's fine. Those values weren't important. Now it's the end of a clock cycle, and it's just stabilized to what to write. So we actually made it go a little bit slower, huh? We waited 2 times 28 instead of 3 times 17 or something? What is 3 times... I guess it was 3 times 18? Yeah. No, what? What is 56 not divisible by 3? That's what I can tell you. Did we wait for 4 ticks? I didn't think we had. At any rate, we figured out how to do it with fewer modules, so that's nice. And I think that that is enough work for this episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.